right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. So the finals for the 2025 California Pro just wrapped up, and it was exactly as I called it at prejudging, straight down the line. Florian wound up in 5th place. Bruno Santos wound up in 4th place. Leandro Perez rounding out the top 3. In 2nd place, Sas Harati, and the winner of the California Pro in the qualification for the Olympia, Regan Grimes. So I know this seemed to be a pretty close top 2. I definitely looked at the comments and there's a lot of people that thought Sas should have won after prejudging. I felt that Regan did enough to win after prejudging, and the reason I say that is, like I said, it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison because Sas is like the conditioning guy, and Regan had a lot of size compared to Sas here. And I think for me it came down to, like I said, Regan looked a lot better here to me than he looked at the New York Pro. This might be the best Regan that we've seen. Whereas with Sas, we saw him in New York, where Regan also beat him there. Definitely not Sas's best look. Sas wound up in 5th in that lineup. Regan obviously in 4th. Then, of course, we saw Sas at the FIBO show, where he was runner-up to Andrew Jacked. And, of course, we saw him in Detroit, where he was runner-up to William Bonac. I think Detroit was his best look. FIBO probably his 2nd best. I would say New York was probably the worst look that we've seen this season from Sas. And I would put this look here probably his 3rd best look behind Detroit and FIBO. He did look slightly tighter here than he looked last week in New York, but I still think that Regan did enough to win. I mean, it came down to conditioning with Sas. That was the thing that a lot of people, that's what they were saying their eyes were drawn to him for, is he looked sharper than Regan. He brings that crazy conditioning. It's the same thing we said about him in Detroit, same thing we said about him in FIBO. And I think this is a similar situation to what we saw at FIBO. Andrew Jacked, a much bigger guy than Sas Harati, but Andrew Jacked was way off the mark in FIBO. He came in a little tighter at finals, and he was able to beat Sas. This, I think, was a little bit different because even though Regan is a lot bigger than Sas, I feel like he was way more conditioned than Andrew Jacked was at the FIBO show. So Regan was able to close that gap more so than I think even Andrew Jacked was. And I think Regan has a lot of things going for him. If you look beyond just the fact that Sas was in really good condition here, which he undeniably was, his conditioning's been great at all these shows. I just think this wasn't his best look of all the ones this season. If you look at Regan's shape, I think Regan has a better shape than Sas. That's one thing. If you look at Regan's shoulders, his arms, particularly his biceps, he doesn't even have the best peaked biceps, but if you compare them to Sas, they're a lot fuller, a lot bigger, and you could say the same thing for Regan's chest. A lot fuller, maybe not as striated as Sas, but there's a pretty considerable size difference. You notice it a lot in the side shots. Then I mentioned at the prejudging, if you watch the back shots, even though Sas might have been a little bit tighter in the lower body and the glutes and the hamstring tie-in, I think Regan's size and his width in those back poses was absolutely overwhelming for Sas. And then you look at Regan and Sas in the side shots, Regan really doesn't look that far behind Sas from a conditioning standpoint when it comes to those side shots either. And he's a lot thicker and a lot fuller through those side poses, but his lower body looks on par with Sas from conditioning from the side. So I would give Regan, out of 8 poses, I would give Regan the front lat spread. I would give Regan the front double bicep. I would give Sas the most muscular, and I would give Sas the abs and thighs, because in the most muscular, you could really see Sas's striations in the chest, and you could just see a lot more detail from Sas from the front than I felt like you could see from Regan. Same with the abs and thighs. I feel like Sas's legs were just a lot more striated than Regan's, and they looked a lot better in that pose. Regan might have had a better flow in the abs and thighs to his physique, but I think Sas, with his conditioning, took those poses. So there, it's 2-2. I would give Regan both side shots, the side chest and the side tricep, just because of the thickness that Regan has in those poses compared to Sas. And I would also give Regan both back poses. So I would have it 6-2. And I think even in the most muscular, you could argue that it should go to Regan because Regan is the much bigger guy. And it's not a bad pose for Regan. It's just that Sas showed so much detail in that pose. I liked his better, but I think you could also make an argument for that pose going to Regan. So maybe it wasn't really as close as it seemed at prejudging, even though, like I said, the comments, there was an overwhelming number of comments saying they thought Sas should win. But I think that Regan did do enough here. I really do. He was bigger, he was fuller, he was more aesthetic, and he brought comparable conditioning. Not as good as Sauce's conditioning, but comparable. And I think that was enough here. But let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. I'm sure people will have a lot to say about this one. Like I said, judging from the comments, there's a lot of Sauce Harati fans that wanted him to win this. And I'm sure Sauce will continue to compete until he gets that qualification because he's been right there, second place, 3 times now this season. And I think eventually he's going to get it. Just for me, it doesn't look like that same Sauce that we saw in Detroit. And that Detroit version of his physique was really, I think, the best he's ever looked. He looked insane at that show. And maybe as he's continued to compete, because now he's done 4 shows already this season, 4 preps, tried to peak his body 4 times, maybe you're just seeing his body start to get tired a little bit here. And maybe you're seeing him start to fade a little bit, kind of like what we see with Justin Rodriguez. He starts out the season very strong, and then the more shows that he does, his physique starts to look a little bit more tired. And I feel like that's kind of what we're seeing from Sauce, because those first 2 shows, he started out with a bang. And I feel like we haven't really seen him come back to that Detroit level the last 2 shows that he's done. Even though his conditioning was amazing here, it was otherworldly in Detroit. And with Regan, like I said at the prejudging video, I think we didn't see those same flaws that you saw with Regan last week in New York. You didn't see him sweating profusely on stage. You didn't see him drastically fading at prejudging. I do think towards the end, he flattened out just a little bit because it was really that final call-out, that final top 2 of him and Sauce, where Sauce really seemed like he was getting harder, and Regan was just getting a little bit softer, maybe flattening out, but not nearly what we saw in New York. And like I said in the prejudging video, I would say 2/3 of that prejudging, I had Regan winning, and it wasn't until that very last part that I thought it might have been leaning towards Sauce. So that first call-out I thought was Regan all day. The next call-out I thought was Regan all day, and it wasn't until that final 2 where I thought maybe it could be a coin toss, and I think that's why you saw Regan win this, because the finals, it was the same thing, but I don't think Regan faded as much at the finals, and it was more, I think the finals were honestly more dominant for Regan. And especially if you go back and you were listening to the prejudging video when they announced that final 2 call-out of Regan and Sauce, and it looked like Regan had been dominating those first 2 call-outs for the top spots. When they called out Regan and Sauce, they said just a quick comparison, as if they already had decided their winner based on the previous callouts. And if you look at those previous callouts, Regan was never moved out of the center. He looked pretty dominant. And so I think going into that final 2, Regan had pretty much already won prejudging, and they were just confirming it in that final 2. And towards the very end of that callout, maybe Sauce looked a little bit tighter, and maybe he was winning a couple more poses. But I think by the time they got to that call-out, Regan had already decisively won prejudging, and I think that's what we're going to see reflected on the scorecards. I think Regan will have won both prejudging and finals, with maybe prejudging score being a little bit closer than the final score. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon if you have not already. And as always, I love you guys, appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power, signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at Nick Strength Power, my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.